Hello and welcome to week 1 of your curriculum instruction and assessment course. This week we're going to be looking at understanding student learning. So our agenda or our main things that we're going to talk about is first just getting to know your students and how to do that through diversity, multiple intelligences, and having a growth versus fixed mindset. Next, we're going to look at understanding what your kids need in order to be successful. That is the main thing we want as a teacher for our students. What is differentiation and how does that look in a classroom? And then some classroom management with looking at grouping students. So first, get to know your students. Yes, all these get to know you activities at the very beginning of the year are great, but this should be happening all throughout the year. So really talking to your students. Each day I would meet them at the door just to say good morning. And you could already feel if somebody was having a good day or a bad day. And you could gauge, how do I need to interact? How can I support this student? Also relate to students. A student that had a lot of behavior issues in previous years came to my room for 5th grade. And I was like, oh, how can I get this student to really enjoy school and to be successful? And I learned that he loved to fish. Well, I also love to fish offshore. And so we talked about that all the time. And I had literally 0 behavior issues from him, from a student that had behavior issues almost daily to 0. And that's just because I was able to relate to him through fishing, which is very, very simple, but it takes that talking to them and letting them know that you're a person too. Just like you want to know me as your professor in order to trust me and respect me, that's the same way with students. Then really understanding the diversity that goes on in your classroom, culturally, socioeconomic, and language proficiency diversity. Truly understanding why is your student acting this way or performing this way will help you to know how to gauge your instruction and have that, establish that learning and fostering that yearn for learning in your classroom. Then multiple intelligences. You're going to do an activity this week that is your quiz for the week, but really understanding multiple intelligences and which one yours is. And then a mindset, fixed versus growth. When I was going to school, we did not look at this at all, but it's really good to understand what is a fixed mindset versus growth. Before it was just like, oh, you either have it or you don't. Now it's, I can do it because. So let's go into diversity. So culturally, so that reciprocal distancing is teachers or students of one culture interpret the behavior of those from another culture, which could create that distance. Oftentimes, people don't really realize that they're giving that distance, but they are, just because there are some differences between the culture. And then we are also looking at the socioeconomic. Many times we see different socioeconomics acting or performing differently, so we group them together, which you shouldn't do. And then that language proficiency, so that cognitive academic language proficiency, which includes listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And people might do it differently. And you have to understand their culture in order to understand why they might be performing this way. So really just, if you listen to your students and talk to them, engage with them, all of these things will come very, very natural. All right. Next, we are looking at multiple intelligences. I can remember sitting in one of my undergrad classes and we talked about multiple intelligences. It seems like 100 years ago, but it's not. But I had a professor that thought that we should have multiple intelligences in every single lesson in all of them. Well, that's not feasible. The main ones that you are going to look at are your visual, your auditory, and your kinesthetic. And we'll get into that. But you really want to be able to adapt your lessons to reach all of your students. So just like now, I'm talking through all of these multiple intelligences, but you can also see it visually on your screen. So I'm reaching those visual and not kinesthetic, but visual and auditory learners just by talking and having a visual representation. You should always have at least visual and auditory because that reaches majority of your students. And we'll talk more about this later on. But oftentimes teachers will just tell the directions. Well, if you're a visual learner, that's going to go in one ear and out the other. So make sure that you have both components. Next is a mindset, fixed versus growth. This is a huge one, especially in upper elementary. You want students to have a growth mindset. It's also called the power of yet. So I can't do this yet, or I'm having trouble with this now, but I can do it. It's more of having that motivation. And they start to be empowered to embrace those challenges. We have this perfectionist of students that just want to be perfect. And it's like, well, nobody's perfect. So what are you going to do when you make mistakes? Those are times that you need to learn from them. I can remember students sitting in my room being like, I can't do this, and just give up. And it's like, no. We can't do this yet. Let's figure out a way how we can. What are we messing up on? What are we not understanding? But giving them those tools to have a growth mindset and not just giving up when they're not perfect or they're making those mistakes. Student success. So yes, this is actually a picture of one of the times in my classroom. I was very much a very hands-on teacher, but get to know your students. Okay, understand their motivation, their health, everything about them, if possible, so that you can truly teach them holistically. If they didn't have breakfast that morning, know why. Did they not want to? Or was there no food at the table or in the house? So really get to know your students. And that goes just talking to them, relating to them. Then know what your students need to know in order to be successful. So you have to know your content, and you have to know how to relate your content to them. So it's not just, for science, we'll say human body. It's not just knowing the human body systems. How do you apply it to other human body systems? How do they work together? Okay. For fifth graders on their science EOG, they don't need to know that, well, they need to know that bones are part of the skeletal system, but they need to know that they also produce red blood cells. So it all works in there, but you have to know what they need to know in order to be successful. And that comes from, you have to study before you go in and teach something. And then allow them opportunities to take ownership of their learning. So don't just stand up there and directly teach and then have them do practice. Allow them to explore, do lessons, do all of these different things to truly help them be successful. All right, now we are looking at differentiation. So content. So that might be changing up and just chunking it, or having a read aloud versus the rest of the class is not. Okay, some students who perform below grade level or have a 504 IEP due to medical might need some more differentiation. Okay, so maybe they're, instead of writing down notes, they have a graphic organizer. Also processing. I use this a lot with my fifth graders, even ones that were not performing below grade level, but they needed a checklist. This helps me. I live by a checklist, and they need to be taught how to use a checklist in order to be successful. Then the product, maybe they have less problems. I would give some of my students that were in the had a 504 or something like that, they would only have to do the odd questions, or they would do the even questions, and they wouldn't have to do all of them for math. But that allowed them to show that they are successful with those limited amount. Then we have classroom management, and we're just looking at grouping students this week. Later on, we'll look at a whole bunch of other ways, but this is just through grouping students. So there's a bunch of different ways to group students, but the key is to have intention behind it. Okay, first is ability. These students are very similar in how they are performing academically, and you put them into groups that way. That often happens in lower grades, especially when you're doing like stations or center time, all of those, so that you can teach them at their level. And you can reteach or you can expand, all of that, but that's usually based on ability. When I got up into like 4th and 5th grade, I didn't use that as much just because there was more of a gap and you also wanted them to perform at grade level. Interest based. So maybe you use multiple intelligences that we've already talked about, but that is very interest based. So using your kinesthetic learners and they have something different, or if they are a visual, they have to create a poster based on what they're learning about. And then that incorporates indirect instruction, which we will talk about later on in the semester. Then students selected. I did not do this very often just because this is where behaviors come about, because as you know, best friends, and then especially in upper elementary, they start to get that, I wouldn't say bullying, but that's where you start to see those cliques and all that. But student selected is when they are picking their own partner. And it just caused some drama. So we didn't do that very often. I mostly did it by who they were sitting near, which is the last one. So it promotes team. It allows students from a variety of different academic levels to really be collaborative and not just single them out based on their ability or anything like that. So this week we talked about understanding student learning. So make sure that you look at the syllabus because we have had a instructor change. You now have me. And also there was some changes to the chapters, readings later on, like week 5, 6, and 7 maybe. I can't remember exactly. But make sure that you get this stuff done. I am always here if you need me. But this is a lot of content and it is a huge overview of basically everything you need to know in order to be a teacher. So really take in, and I encourage you and empower you to take on some of these concepts and start looking up lessons. And instead of just searching on YouTube, all these different random, or YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all of those things, start looking at teacher tubes and teachers that you want to be like, because it will drastically help you in the end in your own classroom. So again, please make sure that you fulfill all of your requirements this week. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Thank you.